Hi, SAS listeners. Welcome back to another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. I'm your host, Dave Markel, coming to you from the Long Valley Studio in Washington, Utah. There's no fanfare to this next comment, but rather just a recognition. This week's episode marks the beginning of this show's 4th year of existence, the official beginning of Season 4. Here's to many more seasons. This is episode 163. And my guest today is Anne-Marie Hauben, a woman whose courage doesn't just show up for the microphone. It reaches back across 30 years of silence, retaliation, and survival through a truth that many in her community didn't want to hear, didn't want to believe, and sometimes worked hard to bury. Yet she's here speaking in her own voice, in her own time, and on her own terms. You'll hear Anne-Marie share what happened to her at 18 years old on a senior trip to Bermuda, where she reports being sexually assaulted while extremely intoxicated by a man who would later build a public reputation and political career in her hometown. You'll hear how trauma shaped her memory, why shame and fear kept her silent for decades, and how the systems around her closed ranks to protect him instead of her. Years later, when he ran for office on a local level, that old trauma was ripped back into the light, bringing anxiety, flashbacks, PTSD, and a wave of community retaliation that would flatten most people. But Anne-Marie chose to tell the truth publicly, to warn her community, to stand up for herself, and to speak out for survivors who've been dismissed and discredited for far too long. This episode is raw, honest, and deeply human. It shows what trauma really looks like in a culture where delayed disclosure is normal and where defamation laws and community attitudes are still used to silence survivors. Anne-Marie is not just sharing a story, she's exposing a system that protects perpetrators and punishes victims. And she's showing us what resilience looks like when it refuses to back down. I'm grateful she trusted me with her story, and I'm grateful you're here to listen, learn, and remember why I do this work. To help normalize the conversation, challenge the culture that allows this harm to continue, and make space for survivors to finally be heard. Let's get to it. Here's Anne-Marie. Hey, Anne-Marie, welcome. It's really good to have you. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I'm really glad to talk about this with you to elevate my whole experience with being a victim survivor of sexual assault experience over the last few years after I spoke out about it.
And that's why I reached out to you. For my audience, I'll just tell you real quick that I saw Anne-Marie's posts on Instagram and some of her story, and I reached out to her and asked her if she'd be willing to be a guest on this show, and she graciously agreed to do that. So I appreciate that, and thanks for being willing to talk about all that's been going on. I think what I'd like to do, though, Anne-Marie, is start with some background information. Can you tell us about yourself?
Sure. I grew up in the greater Boston area. I grew up in a town called Melrose, which is about 10 miles north of Boston. It's only about 5 square miles from one end to the other, but the greater Boston area is very densely populated. So there's close to 30,000 people who live in this city. Even though it's small, it's not really small. Okay. I can go up there and never run into anybody who I know. So when I was 7 years old, my mother died of cancer. And then when I was 10, my dad remarried. From the ages of 10 to 23, when they got divorced and when I moved out on my own, I lived in a pretty chaotic household. My stepmother was not kind. With any type of person you're living with like that, they'll have their good moments and then really, really bad moments. We walked on eggshells in that house, always trying not to upset her. Her mood set the tone of the whole house, and home was not a safe place. I vividly remember walking home from school sometimes, and the way you'd walk home up the street, you'd get to the driveway first. And if her car wasn't in the driveway, I'd do a little happy dance that she wasn't home. And I could not have to have that tense feeling walking in the door, not knowing what you're going to encounter. Like, was she in a good mood? Was she in a bad mood? Mornings, I'd wake up and come downstairs and I'd literally hold my breath until I knew what kind of mood she was in, if she was going to be on a rampage that day. When I was in high school, I went to school there were about 300 kids in my graduating class. Every year, a group of kids would go on a spring break trip. This is the trip where I was sexually assaulted by a former classmate.
So, Anne-Marie, it sounds like you had a very tense growing up period, and I understand that. it impacts really how you move forward for the rest of your life. And then this show is all about having victims and survivors talk about their sexual assault and rape experience. And you just mentioned that that's what happened on this trip. What are you able to tell us about that sexual assault experience?
The trip was to Bermuda, which is a short plane ride from Boston. At the time, you didn't need a passport. All you need was your birth certificate to enter the country. And a lot of kids from the Boston area, different schools went there. The drinking age was 18, so that appealed to high school kids. And so we went down there and basically went there for like kind of a last hurrah, fun before high school ended. And there was a bar that we would go out to pretty much every night. And there was drinking at the hotel beforehand. Then we'd go to this bar. I was a pretty small kid and I could probably drink just about the same as most of my friends, but I'd be that much more intoxicated because I was really tiny. So I was standing at the bar one of these nights, and this guy that I was also on the trip was in my high school class, approached me at the bar. We weren't like hanging out or anything, and I was not friends with him. He was on this trip, but I was not friends with him, and I didn't interact with him at any point on this trip. Even that night when we were at this bar, I wasn't interacting with him. We weren't like dancing or hanging out or flirting or anything like that. Right. He just approached me at the bar. He also said something to me, and then he immediately separated me from the rest of the group, walked me out of that bar and into a cab. And I remember being in the cab, and he was very aggressive all over me. And he was a large person. He was a football player, big guy. And like I said, I was small. And I remember this feeling of just feeling overwhelmed and like smothered. Not like he wasn't like putting his hand over my face, anything smothered, but I just wasn't able to push him off. And I remember the cab driver making a comment about not having sex in the car. And of course, this got my attention because of course that's not going to happen. I was not sexually active at the time. I wasn't going to have sex that night or anytime in the foreseeable future. So to have like an adult man say that to me, it kind of stuck in my brain because it was a weird thing to hear. After that point in the cab, the next thing I remember was sitting on the bed in my hotel room next to one of my roommates, and I was still very intoxicated. I remember not being able to sit up straight and leaning on her. At some point, we knew that sex had taken place. Ward had taken me back to his room, and then I showed up in my own room afterwards in the aftermath of this. And I leaned over to one of my roommates, and I said to her, my underwear is on sideways. I didn't put my underwear on sideways when I left the hotel that night to go out. And anytime I would dress myself, I would not put my underwear on wrong. Like, immediately when you accidentally put your foot in the wrong spot and you fix it. Both of my roommates also remember there being blood, which would make sense because I wasn't sexually active. One of my roommates in the aftermath started yelling at me. She was being really mean, shaming me and saying things like, "Aren't you embarrassed? And how could you do this?" I didn't know what to say. I don't remember saying anything back to her. I remember feeling intimidated. The other roommate, the one who I had leaned over to, who I had been sitting next to before that, said that and the other one girl that was there, they felt so uncomfortable when this one was yelling at me that she put the blankets over her head to get away from it. So that just kind of sets the scene as to what I was faced with on my return, like in the aftermath of this assault, and why it contributed to so much shame and self-blame. And she was like, "Aren't you embarrassed?" And I'm like, "Of course I am." Yeah. And I think about that as an adult, and I'm like, yeah, of course I was embarrassed. Like, I didn't know what to do. And, that's such a common feeling in the aftermath of an assault. As an adult, I never harbored any ill will towards that roommate friend. I guess she wasn't that good of a friend because although she definitely could have been nicer. As an adult, I recognized she was a kid too. She was stupid. She didn't know. She wasn't the nicest friend, clearly, but it didn't hold a grudge against her. So I didn't know what to do. So I did nothing. And I just kind of put it away in the back of my brain. And as you do when something happens, even when something minor happens that you might feel uneasy about, you put it away. And I just wanted time to pass between when this happened and the rest of my life, thinking that, okay, well, that anxious feeling is going to go away. And it does. And with something minor, it just goes away and you never think about it again. But with something so traumatic, it can dissipate a little, but it's going to keep coming up throughout your entire life. And that was definitely my experience over the 33 years. I kept this secret, things that triggered this in me.
Anne-Marie, can I take you back to the night that this happened and ask you, while you were at the bar and this person, you named him as Ward approached you, did you have any immediate thought process as to what his intent was or what was going to happen at that point?
No.
Okay. And then he somehow separated you from the bar, from the rest of the group, and got you outside. Help us understand what your thought process was while that was happening.
Well, I don't think I really had any thought process because I was so intoxicated.
Okay.
And I was, very trusting. I never would have thought that somebody that I went to school with would do something like that.
Right, sure.
Go that far, even like in previous encounters that were consensual, nobody even tried to do that. It was just all innocent teenage making out or whatever. Nothing like that. It wouldn't even have crossed my mind that I was in danger. There was any sort of danger.
Yeah. And that makes sense, especially since you said you were intoxicated. What then was going through your mind once you got in the cab and he did get that really aggressive approach that you mentioned? Was there a fear factor at that point?
Still just like kind of uncomfortable. And like I was confused. I didn't know what was going on, but I still was with somebody that I didn't know him well, but I had been in school with him since middle school. There's a lot of kids in a class of 300 kids. So we weren't in the same friend groups. So I still didn't feel like I was in danger, and back in the 80s, we were told that when a sexual assault or rape happens, it's going to be some scary stranger that jumps out behind the bushes.
Right.
It's not going to be your classmate or somebody you trust, or that I trusted him, but I didn't think that he was like a monster.
Right. He wasn't a risk factor.
Something like that. When I was clearly not I was physically helpless. I was not in a state of mind where I could make any sort of decision as to an encounter like that.
Yeah. I take it then that at some point you blacked out, that because you talk about the next thing you remember is being back in your hotel room with your hotel roommates.
Yes. And I don't know. I mean, it could have been the alcohol that caused me to not remember, or it could have been the trauma, because your brain protects you from things like that. Like when something is so traumatic, your brain is wired to protect you. Yeah. And that could very well be the reason that I don't remember from the cab until I was sitting on the bed.
Absolutely.
That in addition to the alcohol, like a combination of both.
Right. And I'll just mention here for my audience and you, if you don't really have an understanding of this, in terms of the neuropsychological aspect of all of this, you're absolutely spot on. Trauma can cause memory gaps and memory loss. There's a chemical in your brain called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And if that chemical gets interfered with by alcohol, is one of those things that can affect BDNF, but trauma, fear, not knowing what is going to happen. And then in retrospect, even you can have the after effects of amnesia from a traumatic experience like that. So the BDNF gets interfered with and memory just isn't laid down in your brain. It isn't processed. So that makes absolute sense. You're absolutely right that trauma can do that. Alcohol can do that. And you combine the two of them and sure, that makes perfect sense.
Well, and and I'm sure other people feel this same way too, that it's really upsetting to me that there are other people who probably know what happened to me, and I don't even know the extent of it. Mm-hmm. I know what I think I know, but it could have been even that much worse. And there will be people who will listen to this, and probably people in Melrose, and be like, oh, she doesn't even remember. It probably didn't happen. She's just blowing this out of proportion, and she just wants attention. Yeah, and you know when somebody has done something like this to you.
Well,
Like in the
absolutely.
after.
And you've brought up some very important physical evidence of the fact that there was most likely an assault. And not most likely, I mean, in my estimation, yes, he sexually assaulted you. So you were bleeding, you had your underwear on wrong, you have memory loss, you remember him being super aggressive in the cab, and then the next thing you know, you're back in your hotel room, actually being shamed and blamed and not believed, maybe even.
As a former detective, those are all things that would lead, if I was able to report or I knew to report and I went to the Bermuda police, these are things that they would have used as evidence that a crime had occurred.
That's correct. And it's not just the physical evidence, it's the psychophysiological evidence. It's the memories that you do have, it's the circumstances, it's the feelings that you experienced both while he was talking to you at the bar and while you were in the cab with him. All of that is evidence. And that's kind of the sad part about some law enforcement personnel who don't understand the inner workings of psychophysiological evidence and the neurobiology of trauma and memory. And that's something that I stress to all law enforcement to learn in order to better investigate these types of cases and better interview victims and survivors who've been through these experiences, because all of that information is critically important evidence. You've hit the nail on the head with all of what you've been saying in terms of what should have happened if you were have gone to the police.
When I finally started processing this, I reached out to some former classmates who were on the trip. Women. I reached out to I reached out to 4 women who were on the trip to ask them if they remembered anything about this, hearing anything about it. And one of the women she lives in another country now, she's only one of the 4 women even responded to me. She responded, and she responded so kindly and empathetically, and she felt really terrible that had happened. She didn't remember it, but just the care and the empathy and the time, the couple of minutes she took to respond just was very meaningful.
Absolutely.
And then these 3 other women who just, I could see that they read it and they just ignored it. To me, I don't know how you read a message like that and you just ignore it. What kind of a person are you to ignore a message like that? I don't know.
I don't know what's in their heads either, but I think one of the things that you talked about in terms of what the brain does in terms of survival is block things. Mm-hmm. And we do that consciously too. If something comes into our cognitive awareness that is uncomfortable, or that maybe they even knew something, but
couldn't they just have said, or even if they knew something but didn't want to, they've signed on to this weird code of silence, they could have just been like, oh, I'm really sorry that happened to you, but I don't remember anything. I mean,
yeah, it's just,
that seems like basic human decency, right?
Well, yeah, what may seem that way to you, to somebody else may seem like the best way to handle this is to not respond at all.
That's one of the problems. Yeah. And that's why sexual violence continues to thrive.
That's right.
Sweep it all under the rug. Why are you talking about this? You shouldn't be talking about this mentality. And it's part of the problem. And it's one of the reasons that I keep speaking up and I keep being vocal about this.
Absolutely. That's what this platform is all about. It's to educate, it's to normalize the conversation, it's to bring this to the forefront, because what we're doing when we do those things is we're perpetuating rape culture. And I know you know what rape culture is, you've experienced it, we've talked about it. It's something that's terrible social phenomenon in this country, around the world, really. It happens everywhere. I think what's so critical is for everyone to come to an awareness of what you're talking about. And the only way to do that is to do what you just said, and that is to keep talking about it and keep talking about it and pushing against rape culture.
I do know that people on the trip, that he bragged about this because a friend who wasn't on the trip but knows some of these people that were, she said that somebody told her that all the boys on the trip knew. So if all the boys on the trip knew, I'm sure that word got around. But I wasn't going to reach out to any of those men because I don't think that they would be they're the type of people who would, one, be honest or even respond. I'm going to protect myself from people that I don't know are safe people, because I was already burned once by reaching out to somebody who I hoped would be able to help me, and he ended up being terrible. I know that people did know. I have a really good memory. I don't know. Other people seem to not have as good a memory, but there are people that do.
Yeah.
And this was a pretty significant thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it does, like you just mentioned, it opens you up to a very vulnerable situation that why would you want to put further harm into your life by their response of ignoring you, blaming you, brushing it aside, or minimizing the situation?
Yeah. As adults, I might expect that. I mean, it just shows that age and maturity doesn't always bring wisdom. You expect that kids might not handle a situation in the right way, but you would think that grown-ups with kids of their own would handle it better, a little bit better,
right,
with a little more empathy.
You would hope. And again, that's why I'm glad you're on this show, and people need to hear this. It's, like I said, the purpose of this platform is to give victims and survivors a voice to not only further their own healing process, but help those who've been through similar situations in their healing process, but also as an educational platform. And you're doing that. So again, thank you. And I appreciate your courage and your fortitude in being here and talking about this way.
Well, I'm happy to be here. And, I have an important story to tell, and I'm going to continue to tell it for prevention and education. And I don't care if the Melrose Townies don't want me telling it. They're not my concern. My concern are the other victims and survivors, and especially young people who are maybe in a position that I was, where I didn't have adults that I could go to with something like this.
Sure. Anne-Marie, talk to us, if you would, about what got you to the point of actually telling somebody what happened and how that came out and that whole process.
Well, there were actually baby steps involved. It wasn't like I went from zero to shouting this on social media.
Right.
It was a process. So I'm 53 now. So back when I was probably in my early 40s, after Facebook had come about, I had reconnected with some of the people that were on the trip just via social media in a private message conversation with the roommate who had been yelling at me that night. I said to her, I want to get something off my chest because this has always bothered me for a long time. That night wasn't my fault. That was sexual assault, that was rape, and it wasn't my fault. And I want to make sure that you are aware of that. In so many words, I don't know, I have the screenshots, but that was basically the gist of it. Mm-hmm. And she agreed. Now she's got another 20 something years of maturity and education behind her.
Right.
And she said, yes, that wasn't your fault. And he's an asshole and he did this. And she agreed with me and said other things. We had a little conversation about it. So that was that. And then about 9 years ago, I reached out to the perpetrator, Facebook, via private message, because I wanted to tell him that I still remember what happened and that this has affected every aspect of my adult life. Because I know he probably doesn't give a shit. He hasn't probably thought twice about it since he did it. Except for, I'll go back to 4 years after this happened. I did run into him in a bar in Boston. It was a crowded bar and I didn't see him, but he saw me. And I was walking through the bar area and he got my attention and he tried to engage me in conversation. So I'm 22 now. In this brief exchange, he throws out sorry about Bermuda. And in that moment, there's nothing else he could have been referring to because we had no other interactions in Bermuda. And he didn't push me down the stairs or anything, or there was no other interaction. So he says this. And in this moment, all I can remember was feeling that I wanted to get away from him because he's vile, not just to me, other people too, but anyway, to me specifically, he's not a good person. Yeah. He's clearly not safe. All I want to do is get away from him. So I kind of just blew him off and just kept walking with my friends. But then afterwards, first of all, I didn't really have the language, even at 22, or the wherewithal, and I had been burying this for the last 4 years, to really respond in that moment.
Right.
How I could have responded besides just blowing him off and wanting to get away from him. And afterwards, if you were so sorry, where were you for the previous 4 years with this so-called apology? I still lived at home. You could have knocked on my front door, called up the landline. And after you apologized to me, then did you go and tell your friends that you bragged to about this, that you apologized to me and that this wasn't my fault and you did this. And I'm sure they all like slut shamed me and said horrible things about me. And I was a pretty quiet, unassuming kid. And I didn't deserve any of that. Nobody does. Nobody does. Even the most extroverted kid. Nobody deserves that. And I feel like that was more him thinking that was his way out of it, that this wouldn't come back and bite him later on in life. It was his way of trying to cover his ass. Oh, I apologize, so she'll be over it and it'll be no big deal. So when I did reach out to him 9 years ago via Facebook, one of my goals in reaching out to him was I wanted to see if that apology was genuine. Because if he was apologetic then, he would still be apologetic now. Right. He still would feel sorry. So I asked if he had any remorse or if he had a changed perspective now that he is a father himself. 3 of his kids are girls, and he didn't respond. I mean, I wrote more, but I don't have it verbatim in my head. But I saw that he read it and he ignored it. And it took a lot for me to even send that message. It was like that, even just sending that message was scary. And he read it and he ignored it. And when I sent that message, that was when the Brock Turner situation was in the news cycle where he raped Chanel Miller behind the dumpster at the fraternity party. So that was in the news cycle. And that felt very similar to what happened to me. So that was very triggering. So when things like that have been in the news over the course of my life, stuff like that would be very triggering for me. And especially where I hadn't processed any of this and wasn't talking about it to friends, family, supported people, I would just internalize it all and just be sad and maybe go in my room and not come out for the day or whatever, however long. So 2 years after I sent that message, I think there was something else in the that was upsetting. And I sent him another message. And this message, it wasn't quite as nice as the first one. It was a little more pointed, but still, at that point, that message, I don't even think he read because there wasn't the little red receipt, but he did see that I sent him a message because at that point he blocked me. And then fast forward another 5 years and he decides to run for city council in Melrose, in the town that we grew up in. Like what he did doesn't matter and I don't matter. And I'm just going to sit here. I live in Connecticut now. I'm just going to sit here in Connecticut and like some shrinking violet. I'm not the same quiet kid that I was in 1990. I stand up for myself. And your life experiences will shape who you are as an adult. And as a young person, I do feel like I didn't stand up for myself enough in various situations with my stepmother, with friends, the one that was yelling at me that night. So as an adult, I kind of am on the other side of the spectrum where I do stand up for myself and I make a point to. It still was all very, very triggering, him running for city council, because I hadn't really told anybody except, well, when the Brett Kavanaugh hearings were going on, I did text my husband at work. And I texted him because it was easier to type it. I knew I wouldn't be able, if he was standing in front of me, the words would not physically come out of my mouth. So I texted him and I said, I was sexually assaulted in high school. I want you to know that, but I don't want to talk about it. And we didn't talk about it. And then when this guy ran for city council and I didn't know, so the other roommate, the one that I had leaned over to on the bed and said that my underwear was on sideways, we were closer than and better friends than the other one. She, in April of 2023, she sent me the press release that he was running for city council because she knows what happened and she was outraged as I was in a different way. So I sat with this for a couple of months. And then in June of 2023, my husband and I were out to eat and we're in like the back of a restaurant and we were sitting in the booth. The backs of the booths were pretty high. So it felt pretty private. And I said to him, I said, I need to tell you something. I said, remember when I sent you that text? I said, that guy is running for city council in Melrose and I don't know what to do, but I feel like I can't do nothing. So I told him at that point all the details of everything. And, when I first started talking, I thought I'd be able to like talk about it like I can talk about it now, but I literally got 3 words out of my mouth and I couldn't. I had to like collect myself because I was upset. So, it's a really long story from there. I mean, to make a long story longer, because I called a couple of attorneys, not for litigation, but just advice as laws across the country that are being changed to help protect survivor voices, which I am involved in. But being sued for defamation was the concern. And at that point, I wasn't as well versed in defamation as I am now. So I reached out to a couple of lawyers. They didn't call me back. So then even getting lawyers to call you back is a chore. So I reached out to the Victim Rights Law Center in Boston, and I had a conversation with a lawyer there, and she gave me some not great advice, which I have since spoken to the director of that center about, and they were very apologetic that this attorney gave me bad advice. I think they had meetings about it and everything. It was like a whole thing. And, but now I have a relationship with the director of this center, and I'll email her sometimes, and she's wonderful. She's great.
Let me just clarify then that attorney that gave you bad advice was basically telling you not to talk, right?
Yeah. She basically said, if you speak out, he'll sue you. And even if you win, you're going to spend all this money in litigation. You're going to get buried in legal fees. And she made some reference about me wanting to blow up his campaign. And I'm like, that's not what I'm trying to do here. It was weird.
And I think we should talk about that a little bit more before we go on with the story. That intent of what you were trying to do was basically, if I'm not mistaken, let me use my voice as yours, as the way I interpret what I've learned about you. It wasn't to blow up his campaign. It was to make people aware of what had happened, of what the situation was in terms of the aftermath of all of this, and let people make their own decision as to what they were going to do about the fact that he was a candidate.
At the polls.
And am I right about how I interpret what your goal was in all of this?
Yes, and I have been accused so many times on social media of having this vendetta, and I'm vindictive, and I have a vendetta. I decided eventually, I did eventually hire an attorney who I paid for, and she did give me the green light to put out a statement. Because he ran for public office and made himself a public person, he put himself in a different category when it comes to defamation. So I did have some protection. As a public figure, he would have to prove actual malice, meaning that I made these statements knowing that they were false, which is an incredibly difficult hurdle to overcome. I mean, this is my own personal life experience. I didn't make this up out of thin air, and there's so much evidence as far as how I had been handling this in the years prior to me speaking out and reaching out to the perpetrator and talking to the friend from the trip and talking to my husband, all these things. I was afforded that protection. So she gave me the green light to put out a statement if that's what I wanted to do. And I felt like it was the right thing to do. I still feel like I still have no regrets about it. I felt like it was the right thing to do for myself, for other survivors and victims, for my family, for my kids, and for the voters in Melrose to decide who they wanted to represent them on the city council of Melrose. Because this guy, he was on a public forum at some point in October of 2023. It was the League of Women Voters of all organizations. And he said about himself that he is somebody of integrity and character, and facing hard truths are the most important things to him. And I was, really? Because, no, those aren't important to you. Facing hard truths, you don't do that. And your poor integrity, so what those are important to you in other people, but not yourself. I knew that I couldn't someday tell my kids about all of this and have them say to me, well, what did you do? And just be like, oh, I went to therapy. I had to be able to tell them that I stood up for myself and survivors and gave this important information to the voters in Melrose.
And I think that's commendable, and I think it's courageous, and I think absolutely what you did was extremely...
It's like my civic duty. It was my duty to myself, but also my civic duty. And, I could talk about all this, but Christine Blasey Ford, she wrote a book, and it came out in March of 2024, and I read her book as soon as it was released. I think I pre-ordered it, actually. And she talks about what she was going through internally, and it's like this panic. I have this important information, and what do I do with it? I need to tell people. You feel like panic. People need to know this, and oh my God, they're going to be outraged. And then you do tell people, and it's like, some people are mad, but other people are like, oh, why are you talking about this? It happened so long ago. Who cares? Like, it's weird. People are weird. But everything that Christine was dealing with in that summer leading up to those hearings was the same thing that I was going through in the summer leading up to the election in Melrose. And I didn't know about her experience until months later. But when I was reading it, I was like, wow, that's pretty amazing that we had such a similar response to the person who harmed us running. Even though Melrose City Council is small potatoes compared to a Supreme Court justice, it doesn't matter what level of government it is. It's still, the feelings are still the same. And we should want people of integrity, good character, and the ability to face difficult truths at all levels of our government.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, again, you're hitting the nail on the head in terms of what we need to do in society in order to stop perpetuating rape culture. There were others in your life besides Blasey Ford that influenced you in your moving forward with this. Can you talk about some of those public figures that helped inspire you?
I came across an interview that Padma Lakshmi did with Chris Wallace. I came across this interview in the summer of 2023 when I was dealing with all this stuff. And she spoke about her rape that happened when she was 16 years old. And like me, she had never had sex before, and how much that impacted her life. And she had written an op-ed for the New York Times talking about this. And her talking about that and the things that she said in this brief interview about it were really impactful. And I watched that over and over and over and over again. And I still have it favorited in my phone to refer to or show people now and then. And, you know, people like her who have this platform to speak out, it is important. I'm not saying that everybody needs to speak out. Like, if you want to, it's not your responsibility to do it for other survivors. But because she did do it, and I saw it, and I'm sure other people saw it, and other people did see it, because in this interview, she talked about how after she wrote the op-ed, she said she took to bed and she didn't leave her room for like 2 days. And then when she finally decided to face the world again, she went to the gym, and a woman came up to her at the gym and thanked her for writing that op-ed. And she said, that happened to me. And thank you for writing that. And then she said she was in line at Penn Station in New York City, and a woman came up to her and said, I didn't read your article, but a guy I went to college with did. And he emailed me and he sent me the link and he said to me, I'm sorry. And then I was, why couldn't Ward have done that? Why is he like this? That would have avoided this whole mess, probably, because all he's ever been asked to do is be a decent human being. Nobody's trying to put him in jail. Nobody's trying to make him register as a sex offender. He's only ever been asked to be a decent human being, and he hasn't been able to do that. So she was influential in inspiring me to speak out, and also Christine Blasey Ford. And also I read the book by John Krakauer called Missoula, Rape in the Criminal Justice System in College Town. That was recommended to me by a friend during that time. And I read that. That's one of those books that I read with a highlighter. So I could highlight all the parts that really stood out to me and spoke to me, so I could go back and read them again and refer to them again. And literally, I'm not just saying this, the women that he wrote about in that book, I thought to myself, well, if those young people, probably early 20s, if they were able to do what they did and go through a criminal trial, which is beyond horrible and re-traumatizing, the way these defense attorneys treat victims of a crime like they're liars, and it's just really horrible. If those women could do that, then I feel like I can do what I think that I need to do. And so that was very important too at that time. And then since then, there's been other people, since I spoke out, other people who I've connected with, like on Instagram. There's this whole community of survivors, and we have each other's backs. I don't just post my things. I also will dedicate a little bit of time each day to scroll through my feed to look at what other people are posting. And I don't know if everybody does that. I don't have a ton of followers. I'm not one of those people that has like thousands and thousands of followers. I have like almost 340 followers. And also the algorithm is weird. So I don't even know what people are seeing. I don't know coming across people's feeds. So I don't know why some posts get a lot of attention and some don't. But that community is awesome. And that's how I got involved with Callisto.
That's a great organization. And Tracy DiTomasi has been a guest on this show.
Yeah, I listened to her episode with you. Tracy and I communicate pretty regularly now. When I first started getting involved in this advocacy activism world on Instagram, I started just searching sexual assault. I felt this need to connect with other survivors. And at one point, I came across a post or a comment that Jess Michaels had written on something. And I reached out to her. I DM'd her and I just simply said, "Can I tell you my story?" And Jess DM'd me right back pretty immediately and said, "I'm on vacation right now, but let's set up a time next week to have a Zoom call and talk." And I did that and we talked, and she was, Jess Michaels, she's been on your podcast too. Right. And for people who don't know Jess is a educator and a public speaker, and she is a survivor of Jeffrey Epstein. And correct. Jess was down at the Capitol just a couple of weeks ago. She spoke at the rally. And so in my conversation with Jess, she told me about Callisto, and that's how I got involved in it. I told Jess about my idea that maybe I could put something together in my community. It could be a fundraiser and an educational event, and I could invite people that I know and they care about me. They care about this. They don't want this happening to their kids. And Callisto is a game changer for our kids' generation. And I'm sure that people in my community will want to do what they can to be able to do their part to save this vital resource for survivors, which is a free resource, and they run on donations and philanthropic giving. So within like 4 or 5 weeks time, I put together this fundraiser and I had it at a friend's house. She let me have it at her house because she has a bigger, more open space. I went to a deli near me and I told them what I was doing and I said that I needed food, and they gave me a really great price on all this really good food to have at the event. And I did door prizes. So my hairdresser, she's also a photographer and she does makeup, and she did my daughter's senior pictures and a bunch of other kids at the school. She donated a portrait session with hair and makeup. That was my grand door prize. And I put together some other smaller baskets, and I went around to different businesses around here and I told them what I was doing, and I asked them if they would donate a gift card for this event. And I am not somebody who likes asking people for money or even like, and I put myself outside of my comfort zone to do this because that's how important Callisto is. And the night came and it was great. And Jess Michaels also came. Yeah. Tracy flew out from Chicago for this, and their social media manager came and she brought information about Callisto. Tracy spoke first. She spoke about what Callisto is and how it works. And she talked about consent and what that means and what it sounds like, and that it's more than just no means no. And consent is enthusiastic and it's ongoing. It's without coercion. Words that my generation didn't hear. Maybe our kids had heard some of it, but people told me afterwards that it sparked really good conversation with their kids about this subject, conversations that they may not have otherwise had. And then after Tracy spoke about that, then Jess Michaels spoke about her experience and what trauma responses look like and first aid for people who have experienced sexual assault, how to support somebody right in the moments afterwards. The sooner you get that support, the better your outcome is as far as PTSD symptoms throughout your life. And one of Jess Michaels' things that she talks about is that she doesn't like to call it PTSD because we are not disorders.
It's not a disorder, right?
We call it PTSI, post-traumatic stress injury, because we were injured and through no fault of our own. And then Tracy spoke again about the financial situation of Callisto. And then at the very end, I spoke. And that was the first time I spoke in front of people about what happened to me as a tool for prevention and education, because I don't want what happened to me to happen to my kids and their friends or anyone.
Anne-Marie, I watched that video. Did you post that on?
Yeah, I did. I have it posted in the bio of my Instagram account. We did end up raising over $10,000.
And that's amazing. I mean, there in your living room in an ad hoc little meeting that you put together.
That threw together quickly.
The fact that actually Tracy and Jess both came speaks volumes about your story and about what you're doing. And I really enjoyed watching that video. It's amazing. I encourage everybody to. So we need to put a link in the episode notes about your Instagram account. And for those of you who are interested in listening to Tracy DiTomasi, her episode on this show is episode 74, and Jess Michael's episodes are 83 and 84. And I highly recommend people going back and listening to those episodes also.
What did you think about my portion of it? Because that was literally the first time I'd spoken.
Anne-Marie, you would not have known that. I mean, I thought you did phenomenally well. And I take my hat off to you. It was just an amazing thing for you to get up and say what you said and do what you did. That takes intestinal fortitude.
I'm not really a public speaker. Well, I wasn't. I am more now.
Well, it didn't show. I mean, you couldn't have guessed that. It was really great. The whole concept of even putting that together and having people come listen to Tracy and to Jess and to yourself speaks volumes about who you are and what your real goal is in all of this. Like you said, it's not to destroy a person. It's not to put somebody in jail. No. It's not to defame them. It's to bring awareness and community to those who have suffered through a rape or a sex assault and need that support in order to further their own healing process and help others on that journey also.
I do think it's important for perpetrators or would-be perpetrators to know that even if your victim seems like the perfect victim at the time and easy prey, she may not always be that same quiet kid. She may grow up to be somebody with a loud voice and not afraid to stand up for herself, or even look at Alex Cooper, like that whole situation. That coach thought that Alex would, like, she could control her and she had all the power. And then Alex is still young. How old is she? In her early 30s. She ends up having one of the most popular podcasts on the planet. Yeah. She uses that platform for good. Yeah. And I think that's amazing. Not only good for other people, but like it's important to do good for other people, but also you can do good for yourself too.
Absolutely.
People say you should see some of the things that people write to me, some of the things that people say.
I imagine because I get those same kind of comments. I have all these screenshots. I call it my trove, and I don't call it it's not a treasure trove because these screenshots are no treasure, but it's a trove of really horrible things. Even 2 years later, even though they know all these things that I've done, they still say that I'm vindictive and I have this axe to grind. No, that's not what it is about. Again, I'll say it again. We need to normalize this conversation. We need to keep talking about it, and we need to do all we can to diffuse and diminish the impact of rape culture. Rape and sexual assault has such a detrimental impact on an individual. It's probably the most traumatic thing that can happen to a human being. And I've talked about that on this show before. I'm not going to rehash that at this point, but it is a life-changing, lifelong impact. Yes, you can heal. You can get to the point where it doesn't have as much impact, but it's always there. And it's always something that victims and survivors have to deal with in one way or another.
Speaking out gave me so much peace. And what gives me even more peace is doing everything that I'm doing to help other people and help myself. I'm like oozing with peace. And just because I continue to talk about this doesn't mean I don't have peace.
Yeah. Anne-Marie, I hear that from so many guests on this show, that what has brought them peace is talking in a public forum like you did with Tracy and Jess, and bringing this out, being an advocate, talking on this platform. Those types of things can be extremely therapeutic. And while I'm not a therapist, I do provide people with an avenue to talk about this and to express their innermost feelings and thoughts in a way that feels comfortable to them. And you're right. I hear it over and over and over again that being able to tell your story in the way you want to tell your story is extremely therapeutic and helpful in bringing peace.
Dave, I feel like we can't talk about speaking out without talking about the real fear that survivors have of being sued of defamation. And that's where Victoria Burke's Speak Your Truth Act is so important. So Victoria is the architect of this bill. It's now law in California and some other states. This is a bill that protects survivors from frivolous and retaliatory defamation lawsuits. You speak out, and at any time you had a legitimate reason to either file a report or a lawsuit, your voice is protected. And if somebody tries to sue you, they'll face early dismissal, and they will have to pay your legal fees. In some states, they have to also pay any other sort of damages that you incurred due to their frivolous lawsuit. Victoria got this bill passed into law in California in 2023. And this is the law that Blake Lively was able to utilize to get Justin Baldoni's frivolous and retaliatory $400 million defamation lawsuit dismissed with prejudice against her. And after Victoria got it passed in California, she started pushing it nationwide. And just this past June, it has become law in Oregon, in Connecticut, where I live, in Maine, and it's currently making its way through the judiciary whole process in Massachusetts. I submitted written testimony because by the time I found out about it, the hearing had already passed, but there was still time to submit the written testimony. Mm-hmm. So I did that. But in Massachusetts, it was further behind in the process. So I was able to speak at the hearing on June 17th at the Massachusetts State House in front of the committee. You know, it was a room full of people. They were hearing several bills, I think like 70 something bills they were hearing that day. And they were all in the realm of sexual violence, domestic violence. And, you know, my daughter came with me. My daughter is 18. She's a freshman in college now. So she came with me because I felt like it was a really good life experience for her and learning moment to be there and not only hear me talk, but hear all these other people talk about their situations and the things that they're fighting for. So that's still making its way through the whole process, which is not fast.
Right.
But there's another bill that is almost identical and that is also making its way. Each year she brings it to new states. If you live in California, Oregon, Connecticut, Maine, hopefully soon Massachusetts too, your voice is protected, and look up the laws and the language surrounding those. And hopefully in the not very distant future, this will become law in more states. In Connecticut and Oregon, this passed unanimously. This is like a bipartisan bill. Like it passed unanimously through the Connecticut House and the Connecticut Senate. And then Governor Lamont signed it into law. So this is not Republican, Democrat type of thing. Abusers don't care who you voted for. All walks of life are victims of sexual abuse or sexual assault or domestic violence or sexual harassment, all of this horrible stuff.
Anne-Marie, I want to take a real quick minute to say again how much I appreciate you, how much I appreciate your voice, your courage, your fortitude, your strength, and your willingness to be here on this show today. It's been an amazing experience for me to listen to you and to be able to present you to my audience. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Dave. I was really happy when you reached out. Like I said, I have an important story to tell, and I'm going to tell it.
Thank you. And let's stay in touch. As I mentioned this to many of my guests, I'd love to have you back at some point in the not too distant future to give us up an update on not only what's going on with you, but what's going on with this bill and how maybe you will have kept up with it too. I know you're a big advocate of pushing this. We'll talk to you again soon.
Okay. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks.
Bye.
That does it for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. I want to thank Anne-Marie Hauben for being here to share her strength, her honesty, and the emotional work that it took to bring her truth into this space. What she shared today wasn't easy. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't packaged. It was the lived experience of a woman who's carried 30 years of trauma, retaliation, and silencing, and who still made the choice to sit down with me and speak openly so others might feel less alone. That kind of courage leaves a mark. It teaches. It calls us to attention. And I'm grateful she trusted this platform and trusted me enough to let her story be heard in all its complexity. If you take anything away from this episode, I hope it's this. Delayed disclosure is normal. Trauma has its own timeline, its own logic, and its own protective strategies. And when a survivor finally does speak, we owe them more than quick judgments or defensive reactions. Instead, we owe them presence, patience, and belief. Anne-Marie's story shows us how communities, laws, and political systems can be twisted to protect perpetrators and punish victims. It also shows us how that harmful machinery begins to break down when people stand up, speak truth, and refuse to disappear into shame. Her voice is a reminder that cultural change matters, and survivors deserve safety, not scrutiny, for telling the truth about what was done to them. Thank you for being here with us today. Thank you for listening with compassion and curiosity, and for staying committed to understanding the real impact of trauma on the lives of survivors. This is why the SAS podcast exists, to normalize the conversation, to educate, and to hold space for these stories so they can lead to justice, understanding, and change. If this episode spoke to you, share it with someone who needs it. Keep the conversation going in your circles, your communities, your workplaces. And as always, start by believing, because we all know someone whose life has been impacted by rape or sexual assault. We'll see you next week.